This is News Talk.
Now then, you're very welcome back. So we're turning to the story which has halted America and beyond in its tracks over the last 24 hours. Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, or Gigi as he called her, were among 9 people killed in a helicopter crash yesterday outside Los Angeles. The helicopter on its way from Orange County, where the Bryant family lives, to Kobe Bryant's youth basketball academy, where he coaches his daughter, who died in the crash. Reaction in the States and around the world, enormous. Just to play a few different pieces. Interestingly, at the weekend, just by coincidence, LeBron James, as I'm sure you may have seen by now, overtook Kobe Bryant's NBA scoring record. And this was on Saturday, so before any of the events of yesterday had happened. But he paid out what turned to be a very prescient tribute to his idol and former Olympic teammate. So here's LeBron James.
I was growing up through the ranks when Kobe came into the league. He was, it wasn't a dream of mine to come straight, from high school at that point in time to the NBA. But I was like, wow. A 17 or 18-year-old kid being able to make that leap, that's pretty damn cool. And as I started playing more ball and I went into high school, the things that he was doing on the floor, I admired and wanted to be a part of. I went to ABCD camp, and he came and talked to all the kids that was there, and I happened to be one of the kids that was there, and I was just listening. I was just trying to soak everything up I could. And I remember one thing that he said. He was like, if you want to try to be, great at it or want to be one of the greats, you got to put the work in. There's no substitution to work. As I got drafted, I still just admired him, seeing what he was able to accomplish, winning championships, having, being early in his career where, he learned from the misses that he had against the series against Utah, and he just used that as motivation and got better and better and better to him winning multiple championships. He had zero flaws offensively, zero. You backed off of him, he could shoot the three. You body him up a little bit, he can go around you. He can shoot the mid-range, he can post, he can make free throws. He had zero flaws offensively. We take it down to 2008 where we become the Redeem team. And it was a dream come true for me to be able to line up alongside of him. Just admired him for so many years, and seeing him from afar and then being able to be in practices with him and me watching and learning. So on. I mean, it's just too much. It's just too much. The story is just too much. It doesn't make sense. And just to make a long story short, now I'm here in the Lakers uniform in Philadelphia, where he's from, where one of the first time I ever met him, gave me his shoes, he won All-Star Week. It's surreal. And I'm happy to be in any conversation with Kobe Bryant, one of the all-time greatest basketball players to ever play, one of the all-time greatest Lakers.
LeBron James there talking on the Saturday before the events of yesterday and Kobe Bryant's terrible death. We're joined on the line by the Ringer's John Gonzalez. John, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming along.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
The crash itself, fog certainly was a major mitigating circumstances, at least, if not a cause. What do we know exactly about what happened at this stage?
Yeah, so according to the flight records, they took off from south of LA, flew north towards Los Angeles, circled for about 15 minutes in a tight pattern north of Los Angeles, then made a hard turn west towards Calabasas, and then in Calabasas, they made a turn south towards LAX without notifying air traffic control, and then that's when the crash occurred.
Helicopters were a major feature of Kobe Bryant's career. I mean, he travelled routinely to games by all accounts, so this was a very routine thing for him to do.
Yeah, he went back and forth for games. He said, it wasn't about the flash of it, that it saved his body, it saved him time. Anybody who's been to Los Angeles knows that the traffic here is absolutely crippling for everybody. And if you're Kobe Bryant, you can't get around that unless you go over it. And he did frequently. So this was the helicopter that he's been using for quite some time now.
I've been maybe taken aback's a bit strong a way of putting it, but certainly very struck by the scale of the reaction to his death. That he was this iconic has really hit home. And elements of that, of course, are about the fact that he's still only 41 years of age, the circumstances of the tragedy, his daughter's death as well. has hit everyone, I'm sure, who had even a passing interest in his career, but that he was an icon has really been hammered home to me. Can you talk to us a bit about the impact he had in the game? You know, if we're talking about him in some respects as the bridge between Jordan and LeBron, for a period, he was the man.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, he modeled his game after Michael Jordan. He was the heir to Michael Jordan's legacy, and then passed that same mantle off to LeBron James. And when you have these conversations about who the greatest basketball player is of all time, I don't think anybody would argue that Kobe was number one, but certainly if you're going to have a conversation about the top 5 or 10 players, Kobe is going to be right in the mix towards the top of that list. His impact was absolutely huge. He won 5 championships. And when you say about like how people reacted to this, I was at the game in Philadelphia where LeBron broke Kobe's record on Saturday night. And then like the Lakers, I also flew back to Los Angeles. And like the Lakers, I also found out in the air that Kobe had died. And you could hear it spread through the plane. Our plane had several reporters who cover the Los Angeles Lakers. And one of them came over to me and said, Kobe died. And I said, that can't possibly be right. This sounds wrong, you know, when we all scrambled to confirm it and find out what had happened. And as news started to come out, especially the news that his 13-year-old daughter, Gigi, was on the plane, it was absolutely devastating. It was devastating not just because of Kobe's legacy, but also because, as you mentioned, he was 41 years old. His daughter was with him. And this is an event that makes everybody sort of take stock of their life. That if this could happen to somebody like Kobe, if this could happen to his daughter, that for real, for none of us, tomorrow is promised.
He had 3 championships wrapped up by the age of 23, and that LeBron-Shaq relationship was obviously a bit tetchy, but it was compelling, and that team, you know, were just glamour and cool, and Jack Nicholson's watching, and everybody remembers that team very well. So, you know, he achieved a lot young, and he was also a trailblazer on that front, because he went straight in from high school in Philadelphia, and we heard LeBron talk about there almost as a kind of light bulb moment for him as a 12, 13, 14-year-old looking on. So that Kobe went from high school to the pro ranks seamlessly certainly was extraordinary. To what extent has that changed the way franchises now identify and develop talent?
Well, I think teams are constantly looking for younger talent. I mean, Kobe was a rare case. He actually went to a neighboring high school in my neighborhood. So our teams, our schools played against each other. I'm a year older than him, so I saw him play all throughout high school. I covered his senior year when he was debating whether or not to go to college or possibly jump to the pros. And I saw that whole thing pretty much up close. And he was such a unique case. I mean, in high school, as a senior, he would sometimes go and practice with the Sixers just to see, you know, where his game was. And I think that's when he really realized, oh, if I can compete with these guys in practice and really hold my own, maybe I can just skip that step and go right to the NBA. But I think he was such a singular talent that we've seen in subsequent years. You know, LeBron did it successfully. There have been some other players who have done it successfully. But it's a difficult thing to do for any number of reasons, not the least of which is you have to have outsized talent, but then you also have to have sort of an adult's approach to the game even when you're a kid. And Kobe had that by a lot. I mean, he was just that mentality that he had that you saw where he worked, and you heard LeBron talking about there's no substitute for work and you can't skip steps. I saw that when he was in high school. Okay, so it was exceptional at the time, and it still remains exceptional. It's still an amazing feat. I had no idea you were around him at that time, so that must have been extraordinary to watch this talent going up against pretty normal 17, 18-year-olds. Not fair, almost. Not fair, for sure. He ruined our school. He dunked on a friend of mine, and I've never let him forget about it. But you could see how exceptional he was even at that age. And it's weird because I did grow up near him, because I did see him play from when he was a kid and won a state championship up through when he jumped. You know, there was a moment there when there was the college that I went to in Philadelphia, there was a rumor that he might end up there because his dad also played at that same college. And of course, he skipped that step. But then he goes, and I was at the All-Star game where he gave those shoes to LeBron. I was there the night that he announced his retirement in Philadelphia, and it was kicked off his farewell tour. And then, as I said, I was there on Saturday night when LeBron passed him. And it feels like Kobe has always been sort of at arm's length, within reach since I was a kid, and for him to be gone after watching this remarkable career and this outsized impact he had, not just on Philadelphia and Los Angeles, but the NBA and the global basketball community, it's a strange thing for sure.
Anyone who does anything in sport, the work ethic is often talked about and the drive is often talked about, and they're cliches and they can dissolve into nothingness. But with Bryant, they're worth emphasising. Like I was reading, he would routinely get up and, it's not like the basketball season isn't demanding enough anyway on the body. But he would routinely get up 3, 4 a.m. to get in extra training sessions. This was an extra level of drive to what we see many extraordinary players in professional sport have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he had it, as I mentioned, from high school all throughout his career. But I think if anybody ever really doubted that drive and that work ethic, they were certainly divested of that when he hurt himself at the end of his career, when he blew out his Achilles, and then he came back, and then he got a knee injury, and then he came back, and then he had a rotator cuff injury, and then he came back. And I think any reasonable athlete or human being who might have called it quits during that period, nobody could fault them for it, especially when they had already achieved all of the things that Kobe had achieved in his career. But he didn't want to go out that way. He wanted to finish on his own terms and have that final season where he could say goodbye the way he wanted to say goodbye. And to go through the rehabs for all of those injuries that were brutal individually, and then collectively, I would imagine that the difficulty increases by a magnitude. For him to go through all of that was really remarkable.
LeBron in the clip talked about the versatility to Kobe Bryant's attacking game, that there were zero weaknesses, he said, in his offense. Well, maybe more of an offensive player than a defensive player, but that's LeBron saying zero weaknesses in his attacking play. ESPN ranked him as the second greatest shooting guard of all time after Jordan. I've heard other people say that, Bryant could fit into any cog required in the attack. He could seamlessly slot in there because of the versatility he could bring to his attacking play. So I know you said at the outset maybe he wasn't the most quote-unquote talented, for whatever that word means, but he was still absolutely incredible in what he could still do things on the court that other people could not do.
I want to be clear here. He is supremely talented and always was, and you could see that from the very beginning. So if I said that was a misstatement. I would take slight umbrage with LeBron, which is a dangerous thing to do given how well he knows the game and what he's achieved. Kobe wasn't always the most efficient player, so that was sort of a ding on his offensive game, but I think he was right when he was talking about all the different clubs that he had in his bag, so to speak, when he was on the court offensively. I mean, he really could do pretty much anything. It just was, there were nights when maybe he wasn't so efficient. We like to romanticize his final game when he got 61 points. We forget that it was the last game. There weren't any stakes. It was sort of like an all-star atmosphere. He took 50 shots in that game, but none of that mattered because he got 61 points, and it was a really fantastic Kobe performance. So yeah, he was supremely hyper talented from an age, when he started on the varsity in high school at 13. He practiced with the Philadelphia 76ers when he was 16.
Yeah.
He was a virtuoso.
Personality-wise, he could be tough on teammates, he could be ruthless, he could be cold. There was the dynamic with Shaquille O'Neal. I don't know what was their beef or their big issue. I know they're reconciled in later years, but you might talk to us about Bryant as a person. Start with the Shaq relationship.
Yeah, I think that those two guys were similar in a way that they were both all-time talents. Kobe will be a Hall of Famer. He's eligible for 2020 in what's going to be an incredible class. Shaq's already in the Hall of Fame. And I think that they both wanted, at first it was a great marriage. They won 3 championships together. But as you go through these sorts of things, I think that they would probably say and have said that there was some wrestling for ownership of who was more important when, had they just put that part of their ego aside, who knows how many championships that they could have pulled off together. Kobe obviously went on and won 2 more without Shaq, but I think that there's a little bit of a similarity there, that they both had huge egos. And I think that's probably natural too. If you are that good and you've won that much and you've made such an impact on the game, what else is there to do except for sort of argue over who's even that much better? And I think you're right. It is a window into Kobe's competitiveness, that not only could he not stand to lose on the court, he couldn't stand to lose a debate about who was better off it.
And what about his personality generally? Was he prone to giving interest in interviews? Was he a thoughtful character? Sometimes we can, the halo effect, we can pretend like somebody's a profound personality type just because they're excellent at a sport. Where was Kobe off the court?
Off the court, honestly, one of the most introspective, smart, thoughtful people I've ever interviewed. Spoke multiple languages. Again, when I mentioned to you that I was at the game where he decided to announce that he was retiring, it was in Philadelphia, and he kicked off this year-long tour. And in that interview, it must have lasted 30 minutes or something. I mean, everybody wanted to ask a question. There were people from Philadelphia who wanted to know about the Philadelphia connection, and there were people from Italian journalists, and he speaks fluent Italian, so he's speaking in Italian. And that he also speaks Spanish, which I did not know until that night. And he was fielding questions in Spanish. That he was talking to people about his connection to LA. And I think, for all of Kobe's faults, and you're right, there's a halo effect, especially when you lose somebody of this magnitude at such a young age, a premature age at least, to sort of canonize them immediately. But at least on the interview front, when we're, he didn't always say yes to interviews, but when he did his best to give a thoughtful response to your question.
The Colorado allegations were a huge part in the early part of his career. And, it's been very interesting to see the Washington Post suspended one of their journalists, Felicia Sonmez, for tweeting a link to a Daily Beast article about the alleged incident. And I get there might be a sensitivity about how soon you bring something like that up, but I think if we're looking at Bryant's career, because it was so significant in it, it's very odd not to reference that. So the New York Times, for instance, say of the incident, because I just want to be careful in my wording here, and I'm sure people are aware of this, but he was arrested in 2003 after a sexual assault complaint was filed against him in Colorado. A 19-year-old hotel employee claimed that Bryant was working to rehabilitate his knee after surgery had raped her. The legal case dragged on for months. Details of the aggressive encounter with the employee and Bryant's interview with the police became national headlines. Prosecutors eventually dropped the case when the alleged victim declined to testify. And then a civil suit was settled privately out of court for an undisclosed sum. And Mr. Bryant publicly agreed to apologise for the incident. And in that apology, he said, "I recognise now that she did not and does not view this incident the same way I did." There was no doubt this was in 2003, and for the following couple of years, huge and hung over Bryant, and certainly from afar was something I always associated him with for that period. It was such a big story. You might tell us, can't retry the case in any way. There was no case. Ultimately, there was a civil settlement. But the fallout, I know he was benched for a period by Nike, and I know he was booed for a time in other arenas, and that I was reading the people of LA rallied around him massively. So, kind of a tricky question to quantify, but to what extent this remained a part of his legacy or his reputation? Like, clearly it wasn't impacted to the extent which stopped people of the calibre of Barack Obama paying effusive tribute to him. And that's not just in death either. His farewell tour from the NBA was a kind of red carpet affair. But those allegations are there, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what makes talking about Kobe Bryant and what he meant to people messy, right? Because I think that there's been, to go back to your point about the halo effect, I think initially the reaction was shock, and then it was Kobe meant, so much to the NBA and the greater NBA community. But there has been, I've seen in various reports, a lot of use of the word complicated for people to hide behind what happened in Colorado, and I think it's much more honest to directly say, yes, all of the things that I said about Kobe Bryant in high school and him jumping to the NBA and his impact and where he falls in the history of the league are true. It is also true that he tried to be a good family man and was spending so much time with his daughter Gigi, and that Gigi brought him back into the NBA fold, and that they'd watch games together, and that he was helping coach. Those were true too. But it is also true simultaneously that what happened in Colorado happened, and that there was a public civil settlement, and there was a public apology in which he admitted that he did not, that his victim did not see it as consensual. So all of these things are a part of Kobe Bryant and what his life was. And I think to take any piece out of it or to whitewash any piece of it would be a disservice. All of these things were part of who Kobe Bryant was and how his life should be remembered. John Gonzalez of The Ringer. Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it.
Always enjoy it. Thanks.
Off the Ball on News Talk.
The Sport Ireland campus, Blanchardstown.